ladies. It is Christy Love, founder and executive director of LeadHer Ministries, and I want to welcome you to our April 2015 teaching video. This year, we have been talking all year about Mission 365, and we're talking about how to make gospel-centered living and leading a lifestyle that you can apply to all areas of your life every single day. And so far this year, we've talked about the importance of refocusing our attention on the cross and making the cross really a refocal point for us day to day to day. We've talked about love and how we can prophetically love others. And then last month, in the month of March, we really dug into the topic of service and what it looks like to be a shadow-seeking leader, a leader that really kind of pushes away from what culture tempts us to do, which is to promote ourselves, and to really begin to embrace not self-promotion, but how can we use that attention and our leadership and our influence to reflect God's glory and to promote His name, not ours. You know, I kind of talked to you last month about the fact that what we've talked about so far this year in those first 3 teachings have really been a matter of the heart so far. But now, as we're here in April, we're really going to transition into some mental things. We're going to talk about some disciplines, some mindsets, and some perspectives that we need to develop as women so that we can have this gospel-centered focus day after day after day. You know, the topic that we're talking about this month is rest. It is not an easy topic, and it is a topic that I personally really struggle in. You know, this is the crazy time of year for us. Spring and ministry and spring and family and spring and school and church calendars are just a crazy, crazy busy time. So right now, if you are to look at my calendar, it is color-coded, and it kind of looks like the rainbow has exploded all over my calendar right now. It is busy, it is hectic, it is fast-paced, and on top of what was already scheduled to be busy and crazy and hectic and fast-paced, we've had some just personal situations come up. We had my grandmother, who I take care of a lot, has gotten ill and has required a lot of attention and time right now, which I love and am happy to do, but it definitely continues to add different pieces to that calendar on an ongoing basis. So I'm telling you that because I want you to know that this teaching is not coming from a place of, hey, I have it all together and I am an expert in rest, and let me tell you what I've learned and how you can apply it to your life. Not at all. This teaching is coming to you from a fellow person who struggles to juggle all of the balls that I'm required to juggle: motherhood and ministry and church and family and friends and leading a small group and keeping a household running and keeping family running and keeping relationships running and moving and all of these other things that we have going on in our world right now, the same kind of things that you have going on. So I want you to know that this teaching is not coming from a place of expertise. It's coming from a place of need. I need this reminder. I need this message. And I needed to know what it is that God has revealed to me in putting this teaching together, just as I believe that you probably really need to know this too. So we're going to dig through this topic together. We're going to go through this together. We're going to start right here. We're going to start in the Gospels. We're going to start opening up God's Word and looking at Jesus's own example of rest. So I want to give you just a minute to grab a pen, some paper. You're going to want to take notes during this teaching because we're going to go through several different practical things that you're going to want to jot down. And also, I want you to grab this because we're going to look at what Jesus shows us from His life and His leadership. So grab your Bibles, grab some paper, and let's get started. All right, ladies, so you've got your Bibles. I want you to open up with me to John chapter 4, and that's where we're going to kind of begin. Because what I want you to see in John chapter 4 is something that's really, really important. You know, I came across this passage, and I've heard this story so many times. In fact, Holly talked about this story in our love teaching in the month of February. She talked about Jesus and His interaction with a Samaritan woman at the well. But one of the things that I think we often overlook in that story is verse 6. And so I want to read this for you, and I just want you to think about this for just a second, okay? It talks about how they were walking between cities. They had to go through Samaria, and they said that eventually they came to the Samaritan village. And it says in verse 6, Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well around noontime. He sat wearily around the well. That really hit me a few weeks ago as I was rereading this passage, because I thought, you know what? Jesus gave up divinity and came and took on humanity, okay? In this story, in this example, in the gospel accounts, we see human Jesus dealing with human conditions, human emotions, human struggles, all of those things that you and I face, okay? He too grew weary. And I think that's so incredibly important for us to remember, because Jesus, human, us, human. We're no different. We're no better. He grew weary. Yet you and I, so often, myself especially, I know that I can say and take ownership of my mentality that a lot of times I develop this mentality that I need to be superhuman, that I need to keep going, I need to keep pushing, I need to keep striving. But I want to share with you something that I jotted down on my notes, and this is something that really, really convicted me personally in my quiet time just a couple of weeks ago. So I want to share this with you. We have to recognize our human needs and limitations. To ignore them is to disrespect the one who created those limitations. We grow weary because we are in need of God's presence. I thought about that several weeks ago as I was in a position, in a perspective, in a mindset where I found myself just pushing. I was staying up way past times that I know I should have gone to bed to get rest, to try to get things done that didn't get done during the day because I'd overscheduled and I was pushing too hard. I was exhausted. I was tired. And I thought, you know what? I can just keep going. I can push that limit just a little bit further. But it was in this quiet time when I just remembered and was struck by the fact that Jesus was weary. I was weary, and I needed to recognize that limitation, and I needed to embrace it, and I needed to let that limitation not make me feel bad or condemn me, but instead I needed to let that limitation be a catalyst that drove me not to push harder, but drove me to fall into the arms of God and just take a few minutes and rest. Take some time to pull back just a little bit. He created us with those limitations so that we have a need for Him. So one of you out there today watching this video, I have a feeling is resonating with that, just like I did, that you need to recognize that you have limitations, and those limitations were put there by a loving Heavenly Father who created you to not try to be independent and self-sustaining. He created those limitations so that you recognize when you're reaching them that you need Him. You can't do all of this, and you can't do everything on your own. We weren't called to do everything on our own. We're called to do things in His power. You know, a lot of times we as believers, we claim Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And we tend to lean on the first half, I can do all things. But we forget it's through Christ who strengthens me. It's not because of it and on my own I'm going to do it. It's through Him. And to do things through Him, we have to spend time with Him. We have to be willing to rest in Him. The second place I want you to go in Scripture is jump over with me to Luke chapter 5, and we're going to look real quick at verses 15 and 16, okay? Jesus grew weary in ministry, okay? We just saw that, and we recognize that. In His humanity, in His human physical body, He grew weary, okay? I want you to look at this now because Jesus understood that tendency to grow weary. He saw that limitation in Himself, and so He was proactive many times in that, and He made rest a discipline, a mindset that He often cultivated in His ministry. So take a look at this, okay? Luke chapter 5, verse 15 says, but despite Jesus' instructions, the report of His power spread even faster, and vast crowds came near Him when He preached and to be healed of their diseases. Okay, so His ministry is growing. His ministry is thriving. More people are coming. And this is what you and I tend to do in this place, okay? When more things are happening, when things are growing, when it's the busiest and we feel like, man, we need to be here and we need to be present. We need to be doing all of these things right now because it's a busy, busy season, okay? That's kind of where Jesus was at. That's kind of the place I've been at lately where I think, no, I just need to push a little bit harder and then some of this will slow down. Then verse 16 kicks in. Luke 5, verse 16. But Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. He understood His human limitation. He understood that He was going to grow weary. He understood that because it was a busy season, because His influence and His impact was growing, because more people were coming to Him for help, that didn't mean that He needed to push harder on His own. Quite the opposite. He understood that because more people were coming, He needed to lean more into God, not push more on his own. He understood that he needed to build that discipline in and be proactive in rest so that he would be in the very best mental and physical, emotional, and spiritual shape that he could be in to possibly minister to these people when they came to him. And that is something that you and I need to look at as a model when we look at Jesus's life and his leadership, and how do we struggle with this and take on that mission of not just learning from it, but applying it to our life and our leadership day after day. We've got to learn to be proactive and build that as a discipline. And we're going to talk more about that with some practical ways to do that at the end of this video. The last place that I want you to jump over is in Mark. And it's Mark chapter 6, verse 30 through 32. This is right around the time that Jesus is feeding the 5,000, okay? Ministry is definitely in full swing for he and his disciples at this point, okay? Like we just talked about, the crowds are coming. They are seeking Jesus. They want to be healed. They want to hear about the truth that he's coming to proclaim. But it is so important to understand that because privately he built that discipline of rest in that we just talked about and we saw evidence of in Luke chapter 5, he also not only did that privately, but he also modeled that discipline of rest publicly for his disciples. Look at this. In Mark chapter 6, verse 30 through 32, it says this: "The apostles returned to Jesus from their ministry tour and told him all that they had done and taught. Then Jesus said, 'Let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while.' He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. So they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone." I don't know about you, but I know there's been a lot of days where I find myself at the end of the day and go, wow, I don't know if I had lunch today. I don't know if I had dinner today. Like, I've just been so busy, I haven't taken time to stop. I can relate to this season that they are in ministry right now. But I love that Jesus says to his disciples, not, wow, I'm so glad you're back. There's so much more that we need to do. Let's go, let's push, let's do things. He said to them, wow, let's go off by ourselves for a quiet place and rest a while. Okay? In leadership, he modeled rest. Okay? He recognized his own human need for it. He practiced it privately in his own life and in his own discipline. And then he taught it publicly for his disciples and for those that he was leading in ministry. Those three things are critical lessons for you and I to wrestle with, for you and I to struggle with, and for you and I to figure out how do we apply to our life and our leadership. You know, like I told you, this is not necessarily one of my strong suits. This is probably one of the weakest areas of my leadership in my life, is the tendency to push and to overexert myself and to not rest enough. And so I don't want you to just take my word for it today. I want to share with you next some wise advice that I got when I sent out an email to a lot of women that are in ministry, that are in leadership in all different areas. And I asked them this simple question: what have you learned about the importance of rest in your life and your leadership that you could share with me, and that I then in turn can share with you guys? So we're going to look at some of those next. All right, ladies, so we just spent some time really digging in and taking a good look at Jesus and how he modeled rest, how he practiced rest, and how he taught rest. And here's the thing, it would be really easy right now for me to jump the gun and go to the end of this video and just start giving you practical steps on how we do that. But really what I'm doing then is I'm just telling you, how do we struggle with this together? What I want you to do is have the opportunity to hear from some other women. This isn't just me and this isn't just you that have struggled with this, but I want you to have the chance to hear from some other women who too have wrestled with this issue and some of the things that they have learned and some of the things that they have observed, because they too, very gospel-centered leaders, have looked at how do I apply Jesus' example of rest to my life and to my leadership. And here's some of their thoughts that they have. Tammy Heim, a good friend of ours, she's a member of our advisory panel here for LeadHer, who gets a chance to speak in to LeadHer and some of our topics from time to time. And Tammy serves as the president and the CEO of the Christian Leadership Alliance, and I very much respect Tammy's perspective on life and on leadership. Very much respect the faith-based foundation that she leads from. And so when I asked her that question, what have you learned about the importance of rest and how do you apply that to your life? Here was Tammy's response. Rest is a choice, like any other choice that you make. You choose your priorities and resting must be one of them. God's plan from the beginning included a day of rest. Once I owned rest as a personal choice, it changed everything about how I make time for it. Rest is also a statement of how I trust and believe that God has complete control over the work that He has called me to do. When I give my best to His service each day and honor His desire for my rest, then I can trust Him for the outcomes of my labor. Isn't that powerful? I particularly love where she said, rest is also a statement of how I trust and believe that God has had complete control over the work that He has called me to do. What statement are you making? What statement am I making about the work that He's called us to do and our trust in that? You know, for some of us, work is motherhood. For some of us, work is housework. For some of us, work is owning a business. For some of us, work is running a Fortune 500 company. For some of us, work is pastoring or leading a ministry or writing books or speaking at conferences. Whatever work God has trusted you with, the question is, how much do you trust Him with it? And your rest reflects that. And that's a powerful, powerful concept from Tammy that I was really grateful for the opportunity to hear and to wrestle with for the last few weeks. The next one is from Melissa Highland. Melissa is the president of Beautiful Feet International, and Melissa takes mission trips and teams of mission trips literally around the globe pretty much all year long. She is constantly on the go, constantly on the move. When I get a message or a text from her, I never quite know what country it's coming from. So she is definitely a woman that is active in life and in leadership, but she has a huge heart for the gospel and to spread the gospel with others. So here was her answer to that question. When we push and push without rest, we are out of God's will, pure and simple. That was convicting. God established rest from the very beginning when He commanded a day of rest. Jesus modeled it to us throughout His life here on earth. How can we think that we don't need rest when Jesus Himself rested? Sometimes we like to convince ourselves that we are too important to rest. Ouch. That's foolishness. God gives us rest as a blessing and a time to refresh and reconnect with Him. Shame on me when I don't take advantage of that. I read Melissa's email not once, not twice, not 3 times, probably 4 or 5 times when I first got it. And man, I literally fell on my knees in my bedroom and just had to really confess, shame on me. Shame on me when I don't take advantage of that gift and that opportunity and that invitation to reconnect with Him. And shame on me that, like she said here, I often convince myself I'm too important. My schedule's too busy. My schedule's too important to make time to rest. How wrong and how selfish that perspective is. Here's the next one. Michelle Mailer is on staff with Crew here in Springfield, Missouri. She works at Missouri State University, at Drury University. Michelle and I have the opportunity to lead together. We actually lead a small group for college students at our church. And I just really respect Michelle's ability to build rest in. And so I know that this is something she has wrestled with, but I also know it's something that she has started to learn how to do better in her leadership. So I want to share this with you from her. In my pride, I run to thinking of work-related tasks to get done. Because I'm in ministry leadership, I think it's my job to be on call all the time. Instead of resting well, I can become emotionally unavailable to my husband, myself, to God, or other personal relationships in my life because I decided to replace my time of rest to being the fulfiller of others' needs, which I've learned I can't fulfill the needs of others. Only Jesus can. I've practiced using my times of rest in different ways. Just like my relationship with my husband, routine is only helpful to a certain point. I've learned to try new things in my time of rest. I've learned to embrace learning in resting times, and also that sometimes work to other people looks like rest to me. Like, for example, reorganizing a closet or shopping for that special home decor item. I've learned it's important to work together for others' good because to me, I love this, resting instead of trying to always do good is recognizing it's good that God is sovereign. He loves better than me. He cares better than me, and He is way more organized than me. How many times are we guilty of that? That we try to be God. We try to do everything. We try to fulfill everyone's needs around us. And we often exhaust ourselves because we're doing things that maybe aren't our job to take care of. That's a really sobering thought. It's a convicting thought. And it's one that I know I need to wrestle with, and I want to challenge you to kind of think about too. Amy Evans is one of our coordinators for LeadHer. She leads our chapter in Keller, Texas, just outside of Dallas. Amy is an amazing leader. She's an amazing coordinator, but she's also a counselor. And so rest is something I know she struggled to apply in her life as she juggles leadership and church and LeadHer, as well as her business. But it's also something she gets a chance to speak into in her professional life. So here was Amy's thought. She said, rest is needed, and it prepares you for a specific season and situation. God knows we need it, not only physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Rest is a place that He pursues us in our mind. The trick is pushing everything else out so that we can experience and hear Him more clearly. Here's this. Listen to this. Rest is God ordained, but the enemy and the world has distorted it to be a negative thing. It is critical to living out His plans and His purposes for us. She could not be more right. Rest is something that God created. You've heard this time and time again from these other amazing women, that from the very beginning, God Himself rested in the days of creation. Jesus Himself, while here on earth, modeled rest for us. Yet the enemy of our souls, as well as the culture that surrounds us, tries to convince us that rest is a bad thing, that when we take time to rest, that we're really being lazy, or that we're not doing something, we're being selfish. But actually, it's the opposite. We're being selfish when we don't rest, not when we do. And that's something that just that upside down perspective shift can change a lot of things for a lot of us. The next one I want to read for you is from Jill Savage. And Jill is the CEO of Hearts at Home. And I love Jill's because it's mine. She and I have had a very similar experience over the years, and she and I have a very similar practice in our leadership. And I'm going to read this to you, and then I'll kind of explain that. Here's what she says. We will reproduce what we are. That statement was made at Willow Creek Leadership Summit in 2006, and it proved to be a turning point for me as a leader. Like most leaders, my type A high-capacity leadership gifting has me traveling pretty fast most of the time. If I'm honest with myself, I tend to like it that way. However, after listening to that message, I'm not sure that God likes it that way. Hearts at Home started out as a small church event for moms 15 years ago. Now it's an international ministry that I lead, and it reaches thousands of moms all over the world. It demands speaking and writing, and many times I feel overwhelmed. If it's not enough, I'm also a pastor's wife and a mother to 5 children. There's a lot to do, and it's a lot of responsibility to manage. As leaders, we're in the reproducing business. Any leader has influence and impact, needs to be aware of their reproduction in some way. We will reproduce that which we are. If that's true, then I had to ask myself, what was I reproducing? More high-capacity, stressed-out leaders? More high-producing, yet spiritually shallow leaders? If I'm honest, I carry a lot of stress and anxiety due to the pace of my life. My spiritual life has suffered. Is that what I want to reproduce in leaders, in my church, or in my children? Sitting at the summit several years ago, I did some serious life evaluation, and I didn't like what I saw. Something had to change. I've always believed that God is more interested in who we are becoming than what we are going to be doing. But living that out is hard when there's so much to be done. As I began to ask God the question, He began to show me places where I had not refused to surrender to Him. The more intensely I pursued this, the more I realized that I needed time in my life to simply be and not do. Okay, God, you're stepping on my high-capacity toes now, I thought. On the urging of a friend, I chose to pursue one quiet day a week. I didn't have a day to give God, and this was a crazy idea, but I had a vision for a new level of leadership, and I knew that I had to do something different, so I chose Tuesdays as my God day. I found a place away from home and spent the day. I took my Bible, a devotional book, a journal, and a pen. For the first day, the minutes seemed like hours, and I squirmed and paced and struggled, knowing that there were so many things on my to-do list that I needed to accomplish. But I placed my struggles at His feet and stayed committed. Several verses jumped out on the page as I read my Bible, and I journaled my prayers, and my heart began to feel lighter. By the end of that day, I experienced a peace that I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Now, a year later, I'm leading in a different pace. I'm hearing God's voice again, craving His word, and experiencing God confidence deep within. Much like Jill, I had an encounter several years ago that convicted me of that pace and the place that I was at too. Because a lot of us, if you are in full-time ministry, it can become really easy to let ministry become the focus. And we start to, like Michelle said, focus on everyone else's needs, but we don't find that time to rest with Him. And so I, much like Jill, have started to carve out one day a week, and my day is Friday. And I don't schedule appointments on Friday. I don't schedule meetings on Friday. And that's my day to sit and to pray and to rest and to be with God and to dig into his words and to feed my relationship with him deeply and intimately. And it's critical for my leadership. You know, the one thing that I would say, that I would add to this, if I was answering my own question, is something that God has shown me very, very specifically in the last couple of weeks, in the last couple of months. And it's this: you cannot burn the candle at both ends without eventually running out of a candle to burn. You know, I can be really bad at that. Confession, I can be really bad at that. I can burn the candle at both ends, and I can try to go, and I can try to go, and I can try to push, but there's going to come a point where I'm going to run out of candle, and that's not honoring to God. And so I want you guys to hear that if you're struggling with this, and this teaching is, man, it's stepping on your high capacity toes like Jill talked about, because it steps on mine, that I want you to know you're not alone in that. We all struggle because we're all juggling a lot of things. So the question is, what do we do? And how do we make some changes? So I want to give you 5 really practical ideas that you can apply to your life and your leadership next. All right, ladies, so I hope you have pen and paper and you can jot these things down. These are just 5 practical things that I think you can start to apply, you can start to use to help take this concept of Jesus's model. He's showing us in Scripture rest is important, and taking the advice of these other amazing women in leadership who have also struggled with that model and how to apply it to their life and leadership. And so I've kind of extrapolated out of their information as well as some of my own experiences 5 things that we can do together. The first one is this: rest in all areas. Okay, I think a lot of times we tend to rest in one area, but maybe we neglect other areas where we also need to have some time to rest. A lot of times for me, I tend to rest physically. I tend to just say, man, I'm tired. I need a nap, or I just need to lay down for a little while, or I just need a day where I can just sit and not be trying to race a million miles a minute. But here's the thing. For me, one of the places where I often neglect to rest that I need to do better and learn to rest is mentally. I have a hard time just shutting off my brain. I can lay in bed at night and sometimes it's just constantly going. So I've had to learn some strategies for that. For me, a lot of times it's worship music or just trying to practice the art of being quiet. You know, Brennan Manning, who is a wonderful preacher, wonderful author, he has this practice where he talks about, he puts his hands up and he literally just closes his eyes and prays and he says, Abba, Father, empty me and fill me. And I read that in several of his books and I thought, well, okay. But you know what? When I find myself going really fast, I've started to practice that and just saying, okay, Abba, Father, empty my mind and just fill it with peace and presence. And it's amazing, just that rest that I can get, even if it's just for a few minutes or even if it's for an hour, just trying to find some place and some space to shut down that mental treadmill that just keeps going. But another big one that we often neglect to rest in is emotionally. You know, as women and as women in leadership, not only do we have our own emotions, but a lot of times we also absorb the emotions of the people that we're leading, whether those are our children or our spouse or our coworkers or people at church. But if you're dealing with people who are emotional and they're struggling and you're absorbing those emotions, you've got to find a way to rest from emotions. You know, if you've been dealing with a lot of sadness or a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, maybe it's just putting on a really funny movie. You know, we had that experience just recently at our house. It had been just a stressful time. Emotions were high, and we just put in a great Tim Hawkins comedy video, and we just sat down and laughed together for an hour. And just that emotional rest and break was really powerful and really recharged my batteries. So you've got to make sure that you're resting in all areas, not just physically, but resting in all areas. The next thing, the second thing would be this: you've got to rest and trust in God's will. Tammy was the one who said that in her letter that I shared with you, that rest is trust. It shows our trust. You know, for me, like I talked about, Jill and I both have that practice of one day a week that we try to do that. And I know we've talked about this in teaching videos before. Not everybody has a whole day that you can do that. Maybe it's an hour on Saturday mornings that you just carve out to be your rest and recharge time. Whatever it is, I just want to challenge you to schedule rest time. Just like Jesus did, he was proactive. He often retreated to the wilderness to pray. Schedule rest time. Once you've scheduled it, then you've got to protect it. Okay, I think scheduling it and marking it out on our calendar is an act of trust in and of itself, because it's investing time and energy that could be invested in your to-do list, but you're investing in rest and time with God. Then once you've scheduled it, trust in him and protect it and rest in his will for that moment, not all the other things that you could be doing instead. The third thing that you can do is change your perspective. That one's much easier said than done, I know. And we talked about that through several of the women's letters, that rest is often seen as a bad thing or as a lazy thing in our society. But I want you to know this, it's not luxury and it's not laziness, it's necessity. It's important that you do this. And one of the big things that God has really impressed upon me is that exhausted leaders are seldom effective leaders. You have got to be charged up. You have got to be ready to go so that you're ready to respond to whatever he brings across your path that day. That's not going to happen if you are worn out and you are weary. So you've got to be willing to change your perspective and see the importance of rest and investing time in it. The fourth thing is this, and this is one that's really critical and maybe kind of revolutionary for some of you. So stay with me here for a second, okay? But you need to find out what recharges you. Okay, not what recharges your best friend or what recharges your sister or what recharges your pastor or your spouse. What recharges your batteries? Because everybody's is something different. You know, you guys know Holly, and she's been on our teaching videos before. One of the things that recharges Holly's batteries is running or going to look at wildlife. None of those really recharge my batteries. But one of the things that really does recharge my batteries probably doesn't recharge hers, because one of mine is organizing. If you give me a messy closet and you give me an hour and I can just shut down mentally and just figure out how to make that closet organized, that recharges me, that rests me. I know it's weird. But another thing for me is music, worship music, loud music. A lot of people, when they rest, they want it quiet. I'm the opposite. I think for me, really loud music tunes out this constant thing that goes on in my brain. And so for me, if I can get really loud music in a really messy closet, I'm in heaven. And so everybody's different, and you've got to embrace that. We're not cookie cutter in our design. We're also not cookie cutter in the way that God created us to connect with him. And so embrace what rests your spirit. Embrace what rests you physically and emotionally and mentally, and find time for that. The last one is this, and it's simple. It's simply realize that you've got to rest in him. Okay, rest in him. For me, that time that I'm organizing the closet, I'm usually listening to really loud worship music. That is time with him, because I can organize, which is mindless. I can sort things and do things, but I'm talking to him the entire time that I'm doing it. Sometimes for me, it's not a closet. Sometimes for me, it's a coffee shop, and it's just the ability to curl up with my Bible and change the view around me and just listen to him and just journal and just talk to him. You've got to be able to rest in him. You know, I think about it kind of like my cell phone. My cell phone died this last week, and I was completely without technology, and I thought that my life and my schedule was going to fall apart, and it kind of did a little bit. But it made me realize how dependent I am upon my iPhone and how much I need it to function mentally and leadership-wise, how many different ways I've integrated it into my life. But here's the thing, it died completely, okay? It needed to be recharged and replaced, but it needed to be connected. And now that I have it back, I don't want it to die again, so that I know that I need to consistently be charging it. I need to consistently be plugging it in day after day after day after day, so that it's always there. It's always ready when I need it to be. You're the same way. You were designed to reconnect. You were designed to recharge on an ongoing basis. And Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 tells us exactly how we do that. 28 through 30 says this, "Come to me," this is Jesus speaking, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden that I give you is light." Jesus is inviting you to come to him. If you are weary and you are heavy burdened, which all of us are in some capacity, come to him. Leave those burdens with him. You don't have to carry them. Give those to him and trust in him to recharge you and to rejuvenate you and to renew you. You know, a lot of times we have a joke that kind of runs that when I'm tired and I'm worn down, you can tell and you can assess my exhaustion level by the size of my coffee cup. The more tired I am, the bigger the cup starts to get. And so this morning I went to the coffee pot and I opened the door and I thought, I need the biggest cup possible. It's going to be a long day. And so I pulled out my biggest cup possible. And as I was pouring that cup of coffee, I just had this really cool God moment where I thought, you know what? A lot of times in my humanity, I try to recharge with caffeine. I try to recharge with energy drinks and exercise and all these things to keep myself pushing forward. But in his great love for me, which I thought was funny because this is my love cup, in his great love for me, Jesus has invited me to not rest in my caffeine intake, not depend and function in how much coffee I can drink or how many tasks I can check off my to-do list, but to come to him and to talk to him about that schedule and those burdens and let him give me what I need to do all of those things. So I literally took a Sharpie this morning and wrote that reminder on my big coffee cup because I figure when I need this cup, I need this reminder probably most. And so I wrote Matthew 11:28-29 on this cup as a reminder today. So every time I have leaned down to take a sip, it has been a literal prayer again and again today. I'm coming to you. I am weak and I am weary and I need you to fill me up. I invite you to do the same. And I challenge you this month, ladies, find out what it is that rejuvenates you, what recharges you, what helps you rest mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally. Once you figure it out, make time for it. Schedule it, protect it, and build it into your life. Because if you are willing to do that in your life and in your leadership privately, imagine the public example that is, just like Jesus was for the disciples. That will impact the way that your children, your spouse, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, the people that you go to church with, it will start to impact the way that they reevaluate and view rest because of your example, your impact, and your influence. I'm excited to hear how this teaching impacts you this month. Feel free to share stories with us on our website at leadher.org, and I will see you back in May as we continue our discussion about Mission 365.